She came with another rich man again?
I heard her ex-fiancé called off the wedding because she only cared about money.
Women like Amara never really change. They just find a bigger wallet.
Then don't lower your head.
3 years earlier, in another luxury ballroom in this same city, her fiancé had humiliated her in front of hundreds of guests after calling her a gold digger. And tonight, those whispers had followed her into another wedding hall. But this time, the man standing beside Amara did not look embarrassed. He looked calm, dangerously calm. Then one of the hotel managers suddenly rushed toward him, lowered his head respectfully, and whispered words that made the entire table fall silent. Welcome back, Chairman Bello. 3 years earlier, at exactly 8:17 p.m. inside the ballroom of Royal Cedars Convention Hall in Maitama, Abuja, Amara Okeke stood in an ivory wedding gown and listened as the man she had loved for 6 years announced in front of more than 200 guests that he could not marry a woman who only loved money. No one ever forgot the moment Kelvin Adeyemi slid the engagement ring off her finger and dropped it onto the champagne table, Weedy House, while the wedding music was still playing in the background. A few women looked away in second-hand embarrassment, but most people simply sat there watching as if they had already expected the story to end this way. Kelvin's mother was the first to stand up from her seat. She adjusted her wine-colored jewels slowly before speaking loud enough for nearby tables to hear. A good woman never makes a man question her intentions. That sentence followed Amara for the next 3 years of her life. In Abuja, scandals never truly die. They simply change clothes and continue living inside wedding receptions, charity, galas, and white tablecloth dinners, where wealthy people whisper about each other as if every secret in the city belongs to them. After the cancelled wedding, as Amara almost disappeared completely from the social circle she had spent nearly a decade trying to enter. Her small interior design studio in Woods Zone 2 lost clients within 4 months. Some contracts were quietly cancelled without explanation. Others were more polite. They called her personally, apologized, then explained that their husbands or business partners did not want to be associated with that kind of drama. One woman even asked whether Amara approached male clients the same way she had supposedly approached Kelvin. She did not cry as much as people imagined she would. Losing the wedding was not the worst part. The worst part was walking into any room in Abuja and wondering who had already heard the story about her. That night inside the Grand Sapphire Hotel, the whispers returned almost immediately after Amara's entered the ballroom beside Idris Bello. Crystal chandeliers reflected warm golden light across the polished marble floor. A live band played old high-life music near the stage. Expensive perfume, red wine, and grilled suya filled the cold air from the oversized hotel air conditioning system. How old do you think he is? I heard he owns properties in Lagos. Older, rich men always love women who know how to act innocent. Amara heard every word she always did. That was the skill she learned after the scandal. Smiling while people tried to erase her dignity one sentence at a time. Idris stood beside her, wearing a charcoal-colored agbada so simple it almost looked plain. No diamond watch, no loud entourage, no flashy performance like most wealthy Abuja men enjoyed displaying at social events. He simply held a glass of champagnes while quietly observing the ballroom with the calm expression who had spent his life watching room exactly like this one, exactly like this. Do you want to leave? Idris asked softly. Amara shook her head immediately, even though her throat had already tightened. If I leave now, they'll think they were right. Idris looked at her for several seconds before nodding once. Then, don't lower your head. Just one sentence. No dramatic comfort. No promises to protect her from the world. That was what Amara liked most about Idris Bello. He never treated her like a broken woman waiting to be rescued. Suddenly, loud laughter burst from behind them. Amara turned and saw Kelvin. 3 years had passed, but he still carried the same clean fade haircut and polished smile of a man who had always known he was attractive. His black tuxedo fit perfectly against his tall, athletic frame. Beside him stood his new fiancée, Ades, younger than Amara and daughter of a wealthy oil family from Port Harcourt. Kelvin saw her. For half a second, his smile disappeared. Then, his eyes shifted toward Idris. Idris. Amara recognized that look immediately. It was the same calculating expression Kelvin always wore whenever he entered a room full of people richer than him. He walked toward them slowly. Amara, he said smoothly, as though they were old friends unexpectedly meeting again. It's been a while. Yes, it has. Kelvin glanced at Idris once more. I heard you're doing well. The sentence sounded polite, but in Abuja, tone mattered more than words. Amara understood exactly what he meant. Kelvin was not asking whether she was happy. He wanted to know whether she had managed to find another wealthy man. One of Adese's friends laughed softly. Well, Amara has always known how to secure financial stability for herself. A few people around the table chuckled quietly, not loudly, but sharp enough to cut. Sharp enough to cut. Amara felt her heart be pounding beneath the dark emerald satin dress clinging to her waist. Part of her wanted to run from the ballroom exactly the same way. She had wanted to run 3 years ago, after the wedding humiliation. But then she remembered the tiny apartment she lived in, alone afterward, in Garki. She remembered sleepless nights trying to calculate unpaid rent for her closed studio. She remembered watching old clients and follow her one by one on social media. She survived all of it. So too tonight, she refused to apologize simply for existing. Amara slowly placed her champagne glass onto the table. Then she looked directly at Kelvin. At least this time, she said calmly, I came because I was invited, not because I ran away from my own wedding. The entire table froze. Ades turned sharply toward Kelvin. Several guests immediately lowered their eyes to their phones, pretending not to hear. And Idris, he remained completely silent, but the corner of his mouth lifted slightly, almost impossible to notice. Kelvin left the table about 3 minutes later, after forcing polite conversation with a few business associates of the groom. But Amara could still feel his eyes returning to her from across the ballroom. Men like Kelvin hated losing control, especially when the woman who once begged them not to leave suddenly walked into a room looking like she no longer needed them. The live band shifted into a slower high life jazz set at exactly 8:26 p.m. Glasses clinked softly. Silverware tapped gently against white porcelain plates. Beyond the massive ballroom windows, Abuja glowed beneath long ribbons of golden highway lights stretching across expensive neighborhoods in Maitama. Amara kept trying to stay calm, but the hand resting beneath the tablecloth was freezing cold. "You're shaking," Idris said quietly without looking at her. "I'm fine." "No." He took a sip of water. "You're just trying not to let them see it." Amara stayed silent for several seconds. Then she gave a weak laugh. "Do you know the worst thing about being left at the altar?" she asked softly. Idris turned toward her. "It's not losing the man you loved." Amaras stared toward the stage lights. "It's walking into every room in Abuja afterward, wondering who already heard the story about you." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just quiet. The kind of silence shared by two adults who understood that some wounds could not be fixed with cheap, comforting words. "The first time I met you," Idris finally said, "you were arguing with a delivery driver." Amara blinked before laughing for real for the first time that evening. "That was not an argument. You forced the poor man to come back through heavy rain because you realized you overpaid him by 2,000 naira. Because it was his money." "Exactly." Idris nodded once. "That was the moment I realized people had been lying about you." Afa was about to respond when the sharp sound of a chair scraping across marble interrupted them. Kelvin's mother had arrived. Florence Adeyemi wore a silver JLo that sparkled beneath the ballroom chandeliers. She still carried the same cold expression Amara had feared her throughout most of her relationship with Phil Kelvin. Us making you feel inadequate. You feel inadequate without ever raising her voice. "Amara," Florence smiled politely. "It's been a long time." "Yes, ma'am." "Ma." Her eyes shifted toward Idris. A very brief pause crossed her face. Very brief, but Amara noticed it. Because for the first time since entering the ballroom, someone recognized Idris Bello before he introduced himself. "Mr. Bello," Florence said more carefully now. "I didn't realize you would be attending tonight." Idris nodded politely. "Congratulations to the bride's family." Florence remained standing there for several seconds, as if silently rearranging information inside her head. Amara understood the feeling. Abuja's upper-class social circles operated like a private network. Who owned which hotel? Who was secretly in debt? Which family was about to collapse financially? Everyone always knew fragments of each other's truth. And Idris Bello was not the kind of man people casually underestimated. Florence's attitude changed almost immediately. No more subtle pity, no more quiet superiority, only caution. "We're happy Amara has good company now," she said carefully. Amara almost laughed. 3 years ago, this same woman told her she would never truly belong inside the Adeyemi family. And now, she was choosing every word carefully in front of Idris Bello. People were strange. They did not change when you suffered. They changed when they believed the person standing beside you had power. After Florence walked away, Amara stared down at her untouched champagne glass. "You see it now?" she asked quietly. "See what? The way people behave." She smiled bitterly. "Nobody actually cares who I am. They only care about the man standing beside me." Idris stayed quiet for a long moment. Then he placed his glass down slowly. "You're half wrong." Amara turned toward him. "Yes, people are obsessed with power," Idris said calmly. "But that's not what unsettled them tonight." He paused. What unsettled them is that after everything they did to you, you still walked into this room with your head held high. Amara suddenly felt her throat tighten. At that exact moment, the microphone near the ballroom stage crackled softly. The formal speeches were about to begin, and Amara had absolutely no idea that within less than 30 minutes, everyone inside that ballroom would learn the secret Kelvin had spent 3 years trying to bury. The host stepped onto the stage at exactly 8:54 p.m. while polite applause spread across the ballroom of the Grand Sapphire Hotel. The lights dimmed slightly. Golden reflections from the crystal chandeliers rippled across the ceiling like moving water. Outside the tall glass windows, Abuja's skyline glowed beneath the remains of an evening rainstorm, while inside, the wealthy guests continued smiling and laughing as though every life in the room was flawless beneath soft luxury lighting. Amara sat quietly beside Idris. She was beginning to feel tired, not tired of the whispers anymore, but tired in the way a person becomes exhausted after spending too many years trying to prove they are not the villain other people created. You can leave anytime you want, Idris said softly. Amara looked toward the stage for several seconds before shaking her head. If I walk away now, I'll still feel like I lost. Idris did not answer immediately. He simply nodded once, as if he understood exactly what that feeling meant. On stage, the bride's father was giving a speech about family, honor, and relationships, chosen by God at the right time. Guests raised champagne glasses automatically, following the polished social rhythm expected at wealthy Abuja weddings. Then Amara heard laughter again. Kelvin. He stood near the back whiskey bar, beside several men from Abuja's investment circles. Adizet remained next to him, wearing the tense smile of a woman, beginning to sense something was wrong, but not yet ready to fully believe it. One of the younger businessmen glanced toward Amara before asking loudly enough for the group to hear. So, Kelvin, don't you think it's interesting? She always ends up with rich men. Laughter spread through the group. Kelvin took a sip of whiskey and shrugged. Amara has always been practical. Practical. That was the polite Abuja word for gold digger, when wealthy people wanted to insult a woman without sounding rude. Adeze laughed softly along with the others. But her eyes lingered on Idris much longer than before. Clearly, she was beginning to realize the quiet older man beside Amara was far more important than he appeared. At that exact moment, a group of senior hotel executives hurried into the ballroom from the private VIP entrance behind the stage. They adjusted ties, checked headsets, and moved with unusual tension. One female manager leaned toward another employee and whispered urgently, "Chairman Bello is still here, right?" Amara saw Kelvin freeze, only for a second, but long enough. Long enough for her to realize he had heard the name. Idris Bello, no longer some older rich man with Amara, but Idris Bello, the owner of one of the largest luxury hospitality groups in Nigeria. One of the men Abuja investors spent years trying to get close to. Kelvin slowly turned toward Idris again. This time, there was no mockery in his face, only calculation. The host suddenly lifted the microphone again. "Before we continue tonight's celebration," he said with a wide smile, "as we would like to offer special thanks to the man whose leadership helped make the Grand Sapphire one of the highest rated hotels in Abuja this year." The giant LED screen behind the stage lit up instantly. Bello Hospitality Group. The entire ballroom went nearly silent. A short promotional video began playing. Luxury hotels in Lagos, Kigali, Nairobi, Cape Town, then finally stopping on a sharp black and white portrait of Idris Bello himself. Whispers spread across the ballroom almost immediately. Wait, that's him? Oh my God. Amara came here with Idris Bello? I thought he mostly lived in Dubai now. Adaze turned fully towards Kelvin. You knew about this? Kelvin did not answer because he had only just learned it himself. Across the ballroom, Florence Adeyemi's face visibly paled. And strangely, Amara did not feel victorious. Only unsettled. Because once again, the thing changing people's treatment of her was still the power and wealth of another man. The promotional video ended. Then the host smiled brightly into the microphone. And tonight, we are honored to have Chairman Idris Bello here with us. Applause exploded throughout the ballroom. Every eye turned toward Idris, but he did not stand immediately. Instead, he turned and looked at Amara for several quiet seconds, then calmly placed his glass onto the table. And in that exact moment, Kelvin finally realized something that completely changed the expression on his face. The woman he once publicly called a gold digger had walked into the ballroom beside a man. Even he was not powerful enough to sit across from in business negotiations. Christ, Idris rose slowly as applause echoed across the ballroom of the Grand Sapphire Hotel. No dramatic gestures. No performance. The older man simply adjusted the sleeve of his charcoal agbada and nodded politely towards several guests, now staring at him with open shock. That was the most dangerous kind of power. The kind that never needed to announce itself because every room already knew when it arrived. Kelvin tightened his grip around his whiskey glass. Amara noticed immediately. For the first time since entering the ballroom, the man who once made her feel small finally looked unsettled. The host invited Idris to say a few words. Several guests instantly lifted their phones to record. In Abuja's upper-class social circles, being seen beside Idris Bello was almost a form of social currency. Everyone wanted proof they had occupied the same room as him, but Idris only held the microphone for a few seconds. I'm not very good at wedding speeches, he said calmly. I only want to thank the staff who worked hard to make tonight beautiful. He paused briefly. Then his eyes slowly moved across the ballroom. And Idris continued quietly. There's something else I think matters most. The room grew still. In Abuja, he gave a faint smile. People judge women very quickly based on the man standing beside them. A few uncomfortable laughs scattered through the ballroom. Kelvin froze. Amara felt her heartbeat quicken. I've heard many things about Amara Okek, Idris continued calmly. That she's ambitious, that she loves money, that she knows how to choose powerful men. He glanced down at the glass in his hand for a second. But the richest thing about Amara, Idris looked up again, is not her beauty, not her intelligence. The ballroom almost stopped breathing. It's the fact that after everything people did to humiliate her, she still remained kind. No one laughed after that. No one dared to. Because the sentence did not sound like a romantic compliment. It sounded like a quiet judgment against the entire room. Amara suddenly felt emotion tightening painfully in her throat. She was not used to being defended like this. Not loudly, not theatrically. Just honestly, calmly, without asking permission from anyone's. Applause began slowly before spreading louder throughout the ballroom. But Kelvin did not clap. He stood motionless, staring at Idris as if trying to swallow the humiliation-raising thing inside him. Adeze turned toward her fiancé. "You told me she used men," she said quietly enough for Amarat to overhear as they passed nearby several minutes later. Kelvin answered too quickly. "Because it's true." "Is it?" Adeze asked softly. "Or did you just need everyone to believe it?" Kelvin said nothing. A very short silence. But inside relationships already beginning to collapse, silence is often more frightening than shouting. The atmosphere inside the ballroom changed after that moment. The same women who mocked Amara earlier suddenly softened their voices. Some even approached her, politely asking about her interior design work, as if the scandal 3 years ago had never existed. One older businessman from Abuja's real estate circle even handed Amara his business card. "I heard your boutique interior projects used to be excellent," he said politely. "Maybe we should talk sometime." Amara accepted the card and felt something bitter twist inside her chest. 3 years earlier, these same people avoided her like a walking scandal. And now, simply because Idris Bello stood beside her, doors were opening again. Human beings were terrifying sometimes, not because they were cruel, but because they bowed to power much faster than they bowed to truth. At around 10:12 p.m., Amara stepped onto the balcony behind the ballroom to breathe. The rain had stopped. Abuja stretched beneath the night sky in blurred golden lights reflecting against rain-covered glass. She rested both hands against the cold stone railing. Then heard footsteps behind her. "Kelvin, I know what you're doing," he said immediately after stepping outside. Amara did not turn around. "Really? You brought him here to embarrass me?" This time, Amara actually laughed, a small, exhausted laugh, more tired than angry. "Kelvin." She finally turned towards him. "Do you still believe everything in the world revolves around you?" His expression hardened instantly. "You want revenge?" "No." Amara shook her head slowly. "If I truly wanted revenge, I would have told everyone the real reason you cancelled our wedding 3 years ago." Kelvin's entire face changed. For the first time that night, Amara saw fear in his eyes, and suddenly she understood something clearly. For the first time in years, she was no longer the person inside that room who had something to lose. Kelvin stared at Amara beneath the soft golden balcony lights spilling out from the ballroom behind them. The high-life music had grown quieter now, muffled behind the thick rain-streaked glass doors. "What do you mean?" he asked slowly. Amara did not answer immediately. She looked down toward the hotel parking lot below, where black Range Rovers and polished Mercedes sedans lined the wet pavement, reflecting Abuja's midnight lights. 3 years earlier, she had believed Kelvin Adeyemi was her entire future. She thought losing him would destroy her life completely. He is now standing in front of him again. She only felt tired. "Did your mother never tell Adeze the truth?" Amara asked softly. "That your family begged me to stay quiet." Kelvin's face drained of color instantly. "Stop talking, Amara." "Why?" She turned fully toward him. "Because you're afraid she'll find out your company was collapsing. Backstairs." Kelvin stepped closer immediately, lower your voice. It was the first thing he said all night that sounded more like fear than authority. Amara noticed, and strangely, she did not feel victorious the way she once imagined she would. Only sad. You let the entire city believe I was a gold digger just to protect your reputation, she said calmly. Do you know the worst part, Kelvin? He stayed silent. I believed it was my fault. Cold wind swept across the balcony. Kelvin turned away for several seconds before tightening his jaw hard enough to make the muscles twitch. If people found out the company was drowning in debt, he said quietly, Ade's family never would have invested. Amara let out a bitter laugh. So you turned me into the problem. Kelvin did not deny it, because they both knew it was true. 3 years earlier, Kelvin's logistics company had nearly collapsed after a failed shipping deal in Lagos. His family needed a clean story to protect their reputation among Abuja investors, and Amara became the perfect sacrifice. A middle-class woman, a fiancée without a powerful family name, a woman who loved him too much to defend herself. I thought I was saving everything, Kelvin admitted softly. No. Amara shook her head. You were only saving yourself. The glass balcony door suddenly opened behind them. Adaeze stood there. No one knew how long she had been listening. Her face looked pale beneath the ballroom lights. Kelvin, her voice barely rose above a whisper. You told me your company was stable. Kelvin turned sharply toward her. Ades, let me explain. My family invested nearly 400 million naira into your project. The air froze completely. Amara instinctively stepped backward. She no longer wanted to be part of this moment. Not because she was weak, but because she finally understood something. Real healing begins the moment you stop needing to stay and in battles that already ended. Adaeze stared at Amara for several long seconds. Then she asked a question that made Kelvin completely still. 3 years ago, she said slowly, did you actually love her? Kelvin opened his mouth, but nothing came out. And sometimes, silence is the cruelest answer of all. Adaeze laughed painfully and shook her head. I can't believe this. Her voice trembled. You destroyed a woman just to protect your image. Kelvin stepped toward her, trying to grab her hand. Adaeze moved away immediately, and for the first time that night, Amara finally saw something she had never been emotionally strong enough to understand before. Kelvin was not a monster. He was simply a man so terrified of failure that he sacrificed the woman who loved him in order to save himself. And somehow, that truth felt even sadder than hatred. The music inside the ballroom shifted into a slower melody. Someone laughed somewhere inside the reception hall. The wedding continued. But out there on the cold, rain-damp balcony, another life had quietly begun collapsing. A few seconds later, Idris appeared at the doorway. He did not ask questions. He simply looked at Amara's with the same calm, steady expression he always carried. Are you okay? Amara took a long breath. For the first time in 3 years, she truly felt able to breathe again. I think, she said softly with a faint smile, I finally stopped needing to prove anything to them. Idris watched her quietly for a moment before nodding once. Good. And in that exact moment, Amara realized the most important thing she recovered that night was not her reputation. It was herself. Adaeze left the balcony first. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply walked away with the stiff shoulders of a woman who had just discovered her future was built on a lie. Kelvin remained standing there, watching her disappear into the ballroom. For the first time since Amara met him at a networking event inside Transcorp Hilton 6 years earlier, he looked truly small. No polished confidence, no carefully controlled smile. Just a tired man standing alone beneath the cold Abuja night air. I never wanted things to become this, Kelvin said quietly. Amara looked at him for several seconds, then gave a faint, tired smile. But they did. Kelvin lowered his head against the stone railing. I thought if I became successful enough, he said slowly, everything I did would eventually make sense. And now, he stayed silent for a long time. Then for the first time in years, Kelvin looked directly at Amara without trying to win the conversation. Now I think, he laughed bitterly, maybe I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. Amara did not answer because some apologies arrived too late and no longer need responses. Inside the ballroom, the host announced the cake-cutting ceremony. But by then, nearly half the guests already sensed something had happened. Whispers traveled through the wedding faster than music. In Abuja, scandals move quickly. But for the first time, Amara no longer feared them. Kelvin finally turned toward Idris, who still stood several feet away watching quietly. I owe you an apology, Kelvin said hoarsely. Idris looked at him calmly. No, he replied softly. You owe her one. No shouting, no lecture. Yet the sentence silenced Kelvin completely. A cool wind swept across the balcony, carrying the smell of wet earth after rain. Beyond the hotel, Abuja's golden light stretched endlessly into the distance. Suddenly, Amara felt exhausted. Not the exhaustion of heartbreak anymore, but the exhaustion that comes after finally setting down a burden you carried too long. Do you want to leave? Idris asked quietly. This time. Amara nodded. They left the ballroom at exactly 11:18 p.m. No dramatic exit, no screaming confrontation, no cinematic revenge scene. Just two adults walking calmly through a marble hotel lobby while soft piano music drifted from the lounge nearby. But something strange happened as they crossed the lobby. Everyone watched Amara, not with pity, not with mockery, just silence. The kind of silence reserved for someone who finally learned how to stand upright after years of being forced to shrink. A black Mercedes Maybach waited outside beneath the wet Abuja night. The driver opened the rear door while cold wind swept through the entrance. Before entering the car, Amara turned back toward the Grand Sapphire Hotel one last time. 3 years earlier, another ballroom in Abuja had watched her fall apart. Tonight, a different ballroom had watched her reclaim herself. The car moved slowly through rain-soaked streets in Maitama. Abuja felt quieter after midnight. Golden traffic lights blurred softly against the car windows. Idris sat beside her without speaking much. He was always like that, never afraid of silence. After several minutes, Amara finally spoke. Do you know the funniest part of tonight? I spent years thinking I needed everyone to believe I wasn't a gold digger. Idris turned toward her. But tonight, she gave a quiet, exhausted smile. I realized I don't need them to believe anything anymore. Silence settled gently between them. Then Idris nodded once. Good. Just one simple word. But this time, Amara finally understood why he always said it. Because real healing is not when the world finally recognizes your worth. It's when you stop asking permission to feel worthy in the first place. 3 months later, Amara reopened her interior design studio in Woost 2. Not huge, not glamorous, but hers. Some former clients quietly returned. New ones arrived after hearing about the night at Grand Sapphire. Abuja still whispered about her during weddings and charity dinners beneath crystal chandeliers. But now, Amara no longer shrank herself to fit inside other people's opinions. And one rainy evening in Abuja, at exactly 7:12 p.m., as she locked the doors of her studio, Idris Bello appeared across the street carrying 2 cups of hot coffee. No giant diamond ring, no dramatic proposal. Just a man who still chose to walk toward her, even after knowing every painful part of her story. Sometimes mature love does not arrive like fireworks. Sometimes it arrives like finally being able to breathe peacefully inside your own life again. If this story touched you, comment the city you're watching from. And remember, sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is not revenge. It's refusing to continue believing the words once convinced her she was not enough. 2 weeks after the wedding at the Grand Sapphire, Abuja still had not stopped talking about Amara Okeke. At luxury branches in Maitama inside, hair salons in Woost 2, at white tablecloth business dinners where people always pretended they hated gossip, even though they were the ones spreading it the fastest. Some people had already changed their tone. Maybe we judged her too quickly. Idris Bello isn't the kind of man who gets manipulated. I heard Kelvin was the one hiding financial problems. But the internet was different. The internet never cared when the truth arrived late. At exactly 11:06 p.m., a popular Abuja gossip blog posted an article titled, "From one billionaire to another." The article was filled with subtle insults as Amara. They used that subtle insults about Amara. They used photos of her stepping out of a car beside Idris, outside the Grand Sapphire Hotel, and turned it into another story about a woman climbing into elite society through relationships. The post spread quickly. Some people defended her, but most comments sounded exactly the same. Pretty women always survive. She just upgraded financially. Women like her know exactly what they're doing. That night, Amara sat alone inside her newly rented studio in Woost 2, while warm yellow light fell across interior design. Sketches spread over a large wooden table. Rain tapped softly against the windows of the quiet Abuja street outside. She read every comment without crying, just quietly. 3 years earlier, words like those would have destroyed her sleep for weeks. They would have made her stare at herself in the mirror, wondering if everyone else was right about her. But now, that feeling was gone. Her phone vibrated at 11:42 p.m. A message from Idris, still at the studio. Amara smiled faintly. Yeah, 15 minutes later, Idris arrived carrying 2 containers of hot pepper soup from a small roadside restaurant near Gaki. He stepped inside, glanced at the sketches scattered around the studio, then placed the food on the table. You're reading something that's making you frown. Amara slowly turned her laptop screen toward him. Idris scanned several lines from the gossip blog before giving a quiet laugh. People are boring. Amara rested her chin against her hand and watched him for several seconds. You're not angry? Why would I be? Because they think I'm with you for your money. Idris opened one of the soup containers while steam fogged the edges of his glasses. Amara, he said calmly, people only reduce women to gold diggers when they cannot understand why powerful men respect them. The studio fell quiet for several seconds. Then Amara laughed softly, not the forced laugh she used whenever she tried hiding pain, a real laugh, the kind that comes from finally growing tired of fighting endless judgment from the world. Several days later, during a small networking event for female entrepreneurs in Abuja, a young woman in her 20s asked Amara a question in front of dozens of guests. How did you survive everyone judging you? The room went silent. Amara held her glass of water while staring out the window for several moments before answering. People only called me a gold digger after a wealthy man stopped loving me. She smiled faintly. Before that, they called me a future wife. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then a few women slowly began clapping, not loudly, but sincerely. And for the first time in many years, Amara no longer felt the need to explain her life to anyone.